Right now, a war is being fought in a place most people never think about. And if this keeps escalating, it could hit your bank account, your government services, your ride-hailing app, and even the technology that keeps the modern economy running, all without a single bomb falling on American soil. Because this is no longer just about missiles, and it is no longer just about military bases. This is about the invisible digital systems behind daily life. And Iran is now treating those systems like battlefield targets. And that is the part most people are missing. Because once servers become military objectives, the entire idea of a front line starts to disappear. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why one strike in Bahrain may have just changed the way wars are fought in the Middle East forever. Let's start with the one detail that changes everything. Iran reportedly fired missiles at a facility in Bahrain that houses Amazon Web Services cloud infrastructure. And that means critical servers supporting banking systems, government platforms, and digital services across the Gulf were knocked offline or severely disrupted. This was not a random building, and it was not some isolated technical outage. This was infrastructure that helps keep entire economies connected and functioning. And what makes this even more serious is that Iran has allegedly hit AWS-related facilities in the Gulf multiple times already in the past month, which means this is not a one-off strike. It is a pattern. A pattern tells you intention, and intention tells you that this war is moving into a completely different phase. Now here is the part that should make every strategic analyst pause. 24 hours before the missiles landed, the IRGC published a list of 18 major American companies and declared them legitimate military targets. Apple was on that list. Google was on that list. Microsoft was on that list. Boeing was on that list. And once that list went public, the warning became impossible to ignore because the target was no longer just troops or bases. The target was the entire corporate and digital ecosystem behind American influence. They even warned staff to leave their workplaces and told civilians near linked facilities to evacuate, which is a level of public escalation that signals this is not symbolic language anymore. This is an open declaration that commercial infrastructure can now be treated as part of the battlefield. And if that sounds shocking, it is because it is. For decades, wars in this region have mostly targeted military positions, oil infrastructure, airfields, or logistics hubs. But now Iran is openly saying that the servers behind banking apps, payroll systems, government portals, and cloud services are valid military objectives. That is not just escalation, that is a new category of war. And once you understand that, everything else in this story starts to make sense. Because this strike did not happen in isolation, it happened inside a larger campaign that has already been building for weeks. On the 1st of March, drone strikes hit AWS data centers in the UAE and Bahrain, and that attack alone reportedly knocked out 109 AWS services across the region. Banks lost access, payment platforms failed, the UAE stock market closed for 2 full days, and AWS itself reportedly waived customer charges because the damage was so severe that it became impossible to treat it like a normal outage. Then it happened again later in March, and every new strike made the message louder and clearer. This is not an accident, and this is not random retaliation. This is a strategy. Now let's go one layer deeper. Because this is where the story becomes much bigger than just one cloud provider. The Pentagon itself runs sensitive and classified workloads on Amazon Web Services, and the Joint Warfighting Cloud capability connects military operations across branches through commercial cloud infrastructure. That means the same type of technology that powers ordinary business services is also part of modern military command and analysis. And that is exactly why Iran is framing these facilities as part of the war effort. Because from their perspective, if military intelligence and targeting systems are connected to commercial cloud platforms, then those platforms are no longer neutral. They become part of the conflict. Anthropic's Claude was reportedly deployed inside AWS's classified cloud environment through a partnership with Palantir, and Pentagon officials confirmed its use in support of operations. According to reporting and testimony, Claude helped process intercepts, satellite imagery, and signals intelligence, which means artificial intelligence is now deeply intertwined with battlefield decision-making. That matters because once a civilian cloud platform becomes tied to military analysis, every company in the ecosystem becomes exposed. And Iran clearly understands that. That is why they are not only targeting hardware, but also the corporate networks and cloud systems that sit behind the hardware. Now, here comes another layer that most people do not think about enough. The IRGC's target list did not just include American tech firms, it also included companies linked to artificial intelligence, defense, finance, and regional partnerships, which means the target set was wider than a single country. This was not just American infrastructure, this was the entire regional ecosystem around it. And once the ecosystem becomes the target, there is nowhere to hide. Tesla, being included on the list, is a perfect example of how broad this has become. Tesla does not operate military facilities in the Gulf, but it does have commercial showrooms, service centers, and supercharger stations spread across civilian areas, which means Even companies without defense contracts can get pulled into the conflict simply because they are part of the same digital and economic environment. Palantir is different because Palantir sits much closer to the center of military intelligence and targeting systems, and that is exactly why its inclusion matters. G42, the Abu Dhabi AI firm, also makes the picture more serious because now the conflict is touching regional tech infrastructure that supports artificial intelligence, cloud compute, and digital expansion across the Gulf. In other words, Iran is not distinguishing between purely American firms and regional companies that support the same system. It is treating the entire structure as hostile infrastructure. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. What happens when digital infrastructure becomes a legitimate military target in the eyes of a state actor willing to follow through? The answer is simple, but dangerous. Insurance gets harder, investment becomes riskier, data centers become liabilities, and the Gulf's transformation into a global technology hub starts to look far more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. Because the financial damage from hitting servers is not limited to one outage, it spreads into every business and every service connected to them. Commercial property and business interruption policies usually exclude acts of war, which means companies damaged in these strikes may have little or no legal path to recover losses. That is not just a technical problem, that is a balance sheet problem. And when enough balance sheets crack at once, investors change behavior, governments change strategy, and entire regions become harder to insure, harder to finance, and harder to stabilize. Now look at the energy side of this, because the story becomes even more severe there. Oil prices have already surged sharply, U.S. gasoline prices have risen, and analysts are modeling the possibility of even more extreme jumps if the conflict continues. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most important choke points on Earth, and when tanker traffic drops, the effects do not stay local. They spread into shipping, manufacturing, food prices, and inflation around the world. More than 150 vessels reportedly sat anchored outside the strait unable to move, and war risk insurers began pulling coverage, which tells you how dangerous the environment has become. And this is where the economic blast radius starts to feel global rather than regional, because even if the missiles are landing in the Gulf, the costs do not stop there. They move into freight markets, they move into energy markets, they move into computing infrastructure, they move into food prices, they move into global investment confidence, and once all of those pressures hit at the same time, the result is not just disruption, it is instability. Now bring the technology side back into focus, because this is where the modern world becomes truly vulnerable. If cloud services go down, banks do not just lose data, they lose access to operations. If payment systems go down, businesses cannot move money. If government systems go down, public services stall. If AI and targeting infrastructure go down, even military decision-making slows. That is why these strikes matter so much, because they are aimed at the invisible machinery that keeps everything else moving. And once that machinery is exposed, every company operating in the Gulf has to rethink what security even means. This is why the Bahrain strike is so important. It is not just another attack, it is a warning shot about the future of warfare, where cloud servers, data centers, and digital networks are now part of the same battlefield as missiles and aircraft. And if the 18-company target list is followed through on, this could become one of the most disruptive corporate war campaigns the region has ever seen. So now the real question is not whether the situation is serious, because it clearly is. The real question is whether the next target is already being prepared, and whether the world is still underestimating how far this conflict can spread. Because if commercial cloud becomes a battlefield, then the war is no longer only being fought in the Middle East. It is being fought inside the systems that run the modern world. And that changes everything. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Iran will actually follow through on the rest of that target list? Or do you think this is the point where the conflict crosses into something far more dangerous than anyone expected? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of issue people need to talk about openly. And if you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like the video, share it with others following this conflict, and subscribe to Market Mindset for more deep analysis. Because sometimes the biggest story is not the missile itself. It is the system that gets hit after the missile lands.